apologies for absence?
We have apologies from Councillor Ball. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. On declarations of interest, do any members have declarations of interest as set out in the agenda? Excellent, excellent. I've had no items requiring urgent attention. We come now to the confirmation of the minutes. Now, that's quite interesting because I believe no member can confirm those minutes, so perhaps the officers could give us assurance of confirmation of the minutes, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I have checked those minutes as well, and I can confirm I believe them to be true and correct record of the meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have to approve them or just accept them? Okay, then, thank you. Would it be an appropriate time to ask Lisa for a little update on one of the items on the minutes from last time? There's a sorry, I'll sit back a little bit. That's great. Can you hear? Oh, thank you.
I don't have the issue because I'm not sorry.
I just wondered if you could give a quick update on the debate we had on Grant Thornton and the relevant papers that have come, guidance has come out in the last day or two.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So there has been a letter which has been received from the Minister, Lee Rowley, MP, which came out at the end of last week. And that said that they are looking at how they address the backlog of local authority audits. There were over 600 audits currently outstanding nationally. I'm very pleased to say that all of our previous audits have been signed off, and we've been given unqualified audit opinions on our accounts. And we are, there are 27% of councils nationally that have had their previous year's accounts signed off, and we are part of that 27%. One of the things they are looking at is because of there is also a national shortage of auditors. So as well as having a backlog of audits that audit firms have to clear, they're also facing a quite acute shortage of auditors to actually do the work. And indeed, we've been notified by our own external auditors, Grant Thornton, that they are unable to start the audit of the 22-23 accounts, even though those have been prepared and have been published. They are likely to be unable to start that audit until January next year. And that is because they have to prioritise clearing the backlog of audits on other local authorities and councils. But what the government have done is they are looking at a range of measures as to how they try to address those backlogs of local authority audits, address the shortages of audit staff. And one of the things they are looking at is, in order to clear the backlogs, they are looking at the giving some flexibility to audit firms to be able to issue an audit opinion that basically says, so for example, if the auditors had an issue with fixed assets and how they were valued, and that was meaning that the auditors could not sign off that set of accounts, the auditors would now be able to issue a statement that says, in all other matters, we are issuing an unqualified statement except for the area of fixed assets. That's an example. That would enable audit firms to clear the backlog of all previous outstanding audits a lot quicker. That could be good news for us because it could mean that our external audit firm, Grant Thornton, can clear backlog on other clients quicker, and that it may be that they would be able to start our audit earlier than January of next year. You will see on the work plan we aren't the schedule for when audited accounts would come back to the committee is next March, so quite a long way in the distance. The other thing the government are looking at is for the areas of fixed assets and pensions, whether the auditors would be able to do a much more proportional audit rather than following the full international IFRS, where they have to do a lot of work around fixed assets and pensions, because those two areas don't actually impact on our bottom line as such in the income and expenditure account, because it's very much notional figures which are then reversed out through some notional accounts. So they're looking at doing much more proportional audit of those areas. So again, that would speed things up in the future. So those are the principles that I think the government have come up with following the Redmond review about how they could clear the backlog and start to get on top of the local authority audits in other councils. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Has anybody any comment on that? That's great. Thank you very much. Can we move on to the draft statement of accounts? And Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. The report recommends that the Audit and Governance Committee note the draft statement of accounts and the draft annual governance statement for the financial year ended the 31st of March 2023. For the past 2 years, in response to the disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the government extended the date by which local authorities should publish their draft accounts from the 31st of May to the 31st of July. Despite strong representation made by councils, the government has reverted to the 31st of May target date for the production of local authority accounts for the year ended March 23. As a result of this shortened timescale, the Council has been unable to complete all the necessary processes to meet the 31st of May target date, resulting in the draft 2022-23 accounts being published on the 30th of June 2023. One of the main reasons for this was the additional demands placed on the finance team to consider the material movement in the pension fund liability before publication of the draft statement of accounts. As required, a notice to this effect was added to our website setting out this position. Turning to the draft statement of accounts, members will have noted that a budget surplus of £79,000 was generated in 2022-23, which has been transferred to the unearmarked revenue reserve in accordance with normal accounting practice. The main budget variations, with a brief explanation of each item, are shown on page 9 of the narrative statement or page 21 of your agenda papers. The impact of increasing interest rates and rising inflation can be clearly seen in a number of the variations. Key to the authority's financial resilience are its reserves, which are at a prudent level. As at the 31st of March 23, the Council held 8.9 million in earmarked reserves and 1.57 million in unearmarked reserves, a total of 10.471 million. The pension liability as at the 31st of March of 5.5 million represents a significant reduction from the previous year's deficit of 24.2 million. The reduced liability is as a result of reduced life expectancy projections and an increase in interest rates affecting the discount rate for liabilities. Moving on to the annual governance statement, Appendix B contains details of the Council's annual self-assessment of its compliance with the 7 core principles of good governance. Action plans setting out arrangements to secure continuous improvement in the areas identified from the Council's system of internal controls and internal audit recommendations are also included. As we've heard, the national position in respect of the delays in the auditing of local government accounts and the Grant Thornton staff shortages means that the audit statement of accounts will not be brought back to the Audit and Governance Committee for approval until March 24. The audited accounts would normally be presented to this committee in September of this year, each year. As Mrs. Bucko has just explained, A recent letter received from Lee Rowley MP proposes that the National Audit Office and DULAC set a series of statutory deadlines to address the significant backlog of local authority audits in other councils. And as we've heard, only 27% of councils nationally have had their accounts for 2021-22 signed off by their auditor. And West Devon are within that 27%. So that is testament to the completeness and accuracy of the council's finances. And I'd like to thank Mrs. Buckle, Mrs. Henstock, and indeed all members of the finance team, as it was their commitment and professionalism that enabled the audit to be completed in a timely manner. In closing, Chair, I refer back to the statement of accounts, and I am reassured by Mrs. Buckle's comments in the narrative statement that the financial standing of the council is secure in the immediate future. And with your permission, Chair, I will hand over to Mrs. Buckle and Mrs. Henstock for their comments on the statement of accounts.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, in terms of the main points of the accounts, I would refer members to page 9 of the accounts, which is page 21 of the printed agenda, where we set out a summary of the overspends and underspends against our budgeted amount for 22-23. And as Councillor Edmonds has said, a very pleasing position whereby the council had underspent against its budget by 79,000, which is about 1%. And just looking at some of those key variations there, obviously last year saw a cost of living crisis. We saw interest rates being successively increased by the Bank of England and are now standing at 5%. So on that top line there, in terms of our treasury management income, we did earn extra investment income on the council's investments that totalled 575,000 more than the budgeted income at the time. And that's as, you know, the Bank of England looked to tackle surging inflation. Inflation has now fallen back to 7.9% in June. And is starting to come down. But treasury management income, a key income stream for the council. And last year we actually achieved overall a rate of 4.67% average rate of return, which is a good rate of return on the council's investments. We also had some salary savings last year. Members will be aware that at the March committee, we considered a report that looked at the shared service methodology. So this is about how we share the cost of our staffing structure with our shared service partner, South Hams District Council. And the methodology showed that there was actually 86,000 that was due back to West Devon from the apportionments of, and that mainly really related to South Hams bringing the waste service back in-house last year. So you can see their salary savings formed 258,000 for the Borough Council. We also had some underspends on things like homelessness prevention costs. That was mainly due to some unbudgeted grant income that we had from the government. We also had some additional income on things like trade waste and garden waste income. In terms of things that were additional expenditure on the council's budget or reduction in income, there was a national pay award last year for 22-23, which was a set amount of 1,925 on all pay points. That's a national agreement. And the pay award did result in additional salary costs of 230,000. Members will also be aware that we obviously had additional costs on the council's waste and recycling contract of 218,000 and also contract inflation. So at the start of a financial year, we do make an estimate around what inflation will be on things like contracts and on the council's own service expenditure. We'd estimated about 3%, but actually the actual figure for contract inflation last year came out at around 12%. So that's the reason it was higher. We also had quite an income on quite a shortfall on planning income. That was down by 39% against the budget. And I am speaking to the Assistant Director for Planning about what is our action plan that we're putting in place to address that planning income shortfall. We were also overspent on software and support contracts for IT. Again, part of that is due to inflationary pressures that we have on the council's contracts around IT. And we did also see a shortfall in car parking income. And these things were highlighted to members during the year as part of our budget monitoring reports, as we could see the trends around car parking income. And car parking income hasn't made a recovery, really, particularly around the town centre car parks, although the figures for this financial year are starting to look better. And in terms of homelessness costs, we did have some additional expenditure on temporary accommodation, over and above what we were able to claim through the Department of Works and Pensions subsidy. So when you put all that together, that did result in an underspend for the council of 79,000. As Councillor Edmonds has said, that goes into our unearmarked reserves, which now stand at 1.569 million. Other key points to highlight are the pension liability changes, which Councillor Edmonds has already explained. Obviously, that's a significant reduction in the pension liability. That is just a snapshot at a point in time, so that will probably look different again when we look at March 24. In terms of our business rate income and our council tax income, again, I'm very pleased to report to the committee that we had top quartile performance for our council tax collection and our business rate collection. Our collection rates for council tax were 98.34%. Our collection rate for business rates was 98.95%. And we were in the top quartile of councils nationally for collection of key income streams, council tax and business rates. So that's really good news. Just across the page, on page 24 of the agenda, we do set out the council's borrowing there. So total borrowing has reduced from 28.3 million to 27.7. And in section 19 of page 24, we do set out the capital expenditure of the council, which was around about £2 million. A large part of that was on housing renovation grants, including disabled facilities grants. So this is where we use better care funding from the government to enable residents to stay living within their own home independently, and that's through things like a downstairs bathroom or stair lifts, downstairs bedroom, and that's a government grant funding stream. In terms of going forward, going concern, I think the council's in a good position in terms of its level of reserves and things that we know are in terms of income streams for next year. On page 28 there, we just talk about some of the things we know are coming up next year. So the council was successful in attracting 13.4 million from the government for a new railway and integrated transport hub on the eastern edge of Oakhampton. So that is a large capital project which will be going through our accounts over the next couple of years. Similarly, we were successful in attracting £1 million in the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Looking forward, we are looking forward now to members in conjunction with our communities setting new corporate strategy. And I think in terms of our financial future, the financial standing of the council is secure in the immediate future. We obviously still have much work to do to ensure long-term financial sustainability. And we do know that the government has pushed back things like the fair funding review, the reset the business rate baseline, and longer-term funding reforms. So we'll await to see what the next finance settlement looks like, but I think we're in a good position moving forward, Chairman. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That's quite a comprehensive introduction. I like that very much. Could I throw it open to questions? Sir Cheadle.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa, for that summary. I never thought I'd welcome an increase in interest rates, but fortunately it's come at the time to bail us out in some other areas. I've got a couple of questions. The loss on, or the unexpected rise, I should say, in the cost of waste collection, is any of that attributable to the separation of the waste contract between South Hams and West Devon, or was that written down last year?
So there was a report that came back to members which talked about we did need to enter into a new contract with our waste contractor, purely because the previous contract was a joint contract. And in doing so, that contract was effective from the 1st of July, and there were things that had to be built into that. So one of the things was around obviously fuel prices had increased. There were inflationary aspects around wages, lack of HGV drivers. So there were some external factors. There was a small amount which was to do with there was a shared service saving across both contracts. So that was encompassed in there. But in terms of, and there was an extra round which had to also be included within that. But in the main, these were just external factors impacting on West Devon as a single council, really.
My second question is around planning. The drop in revenue from, or income from planning, is that simply because not so many people are putting in planning applications, or is that anything to do with our ability to process planning applications?
I'll hand over to Mr. Powell very, very shortly, who's the director in charge of planning, but I have been speaking to the assistant director from planning, and what we can see is in terms of our number of planning applications, they are actually still increasing. So in 2020, the number of planning applications were 565. In 2021, it was 583, and in last year, 2022, the number of applications coming in was 626. So the application numbers are increasing, but what we are seeing is a drop in the major applications, and they are the ones that generate the most income. But I'll hand over to Mr. Powell. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Chair. Well, you've actually covered the question really well, the answer really well. The issue is with the JLP, a certain number of major sites are allocated, and most of those have now come through the process. So we're trying to tackle this in a number of ways. As Lisa said, the actual number of applications has gone up, so the demand on the team is higher than ever. So what we're looking at is how do we generate more income through the pre-app process, through planning performance agreements, reducing our costs in terms of advertising and so on. So we're looking at it from both sides, but ultimately at the moment, without sort of exception sites coming forward and windfalls in that sense, the risk is that until the JLP is reviewed and more sites are allocated, our income will remain lower than
I mean, there's a hidden risk there as well. If major applications don't come through the way we're expecting them to, it might threaten our 5-year land supply.
Absolutely. The case.
Thank you. The third question is probably one of the more tricky ones to answer.
Excuse me, is your third and final question, Councillor?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's about software and support contracts. Well, that line in the plan, but it hints at remote working or working from home. I guess that means, and I just wonder if any analysis has been done on the financial aspect, the financial implications of the policy we've adopted for working from home.
I don't think we've done any specific analysis around that. That comment is around the number of users that we've got on the system, and we have had to increase things like some of our broadband width to cope with but we did that during COVID, to cope with the number of people that can be accessing the system at any one time, but also the speed of that system as well. Because what we can see is obviously the faster those systems work. I mean, you know, during April, May, June, we've got everyone in the finance team all trying to access the ledger probably at the same time. So you do get peaks where you need the system capability to be fast, constantly, whereas in other months it probably tails off a bit. So we did need to do things to enhance the IT so that it could cope with large number of users working from home. But I think what we've seen is that inflation has been the main impact on our ICT costs, and because obviously inflation is very high at the moment, the suppliers of our IT just keep putting the costs up. And, you know, all councils are experiencing the same inflationary pressures of IT contracts. I mean, obviously, if you benchmark our IT costs against other councils, we are very low. And the reason that we are low is because we share the cost of our IT with South Hants District Council. So although our costs are going up, we are still way below what it's costing other councils to run their IT. And that's because of the way we share all the costs with another council. And that
my
gives
question
us
really wasn't about
resilience
IT,
as
it
well.
was more about whether the policy of working from home is a cost-effective one or an expensive one, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in terms of productivity, I think it's probably enhanced our productivity. But yeah. Pardon? Yes. Yes, that's right. I don't know if you want to add anything.
That's great. I think it's one of these questions that you sort of can't give a definitive answer with quite straight off the cuff. Councillor Sellers.
Thank you, Chairman. In the narrative of the draft statement of accounts on page 9, I refer to the shortfall in car parking income. There is an income shortfall of £168,000, 16%, and it's mentioned that the COVID and online shopping continued to have an impact on the town centre car parks usage. Having spoken or having listened to commuters in Tavistock, and apologies for people representing outside Tavistock, but I'm going to be parochial here. Listening to the commuters and users, the local businesses, the alterations from changing long stay car parks to short stay had an implication insofar as the users started parking in residential areas. Now, as the county councillor, my grey hairs have increased because more residents complain about people blocking drives and generally not using the designated car parks. Listening to the users of the car parks, they say, well, they are not going to use the Riverside car park and because they don't feel safe in the winter, blah, blah, blah. Now, germane to this meeting, I firmly believe that the Audit Committee should make a recommendation that the parking, that there needs to be another parking focus on the difference between long and short stay car parking. And if there are any officers in the room which who can advise me, that would be great. I declare an interest that as the county councillor, I'm involved with the idea of having on-street car parking. I've made no secret about my not wanting that. However, we do have to look at it. So given that there's such a significant drop of income and the fact that there's an increase in people using residential car parks, I suggest we look at this more clearly as a council outside of the Audit Committee, Chairman. However, a recommendation from the Audit Committee that a car parking focus group is re-established. I think, I hope other people may support me on that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Edmonds, is that fall under your portfolio in terms of budgetary matters?
Councillor Bridgewater.
A car parking review is going to take place at some point. That has been in the diary for a while. Yes, I hear everything you have to say, and I'm confident that review will be undertaken perhaps later this year. I'm not sure of the timescale, but I believe it will be this year, and I'm sure all the points you've raised will be fully considered as part of that overall review, not only in Tavistock, but of course car parks across the borough. On the plus side, I do know that car parking income, as at the end of June, Mrs. Henstock is nodding, that's a good sign, is showing an increase. So we are now ahead of the amended target, and I possibly we're almost back, if not ahead of where we were pre-COVID. So there are some very encouraging signs as people start to return and get out and about and return to Tavistock and Oakhampton and Hatherley and Chowford and everywhere else that we got a car park. So that is really encouraging. So we will continue to take a borough-wide perspective and carry out a full review and come up with, well, what members feel is the right approach to take us forward.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. That's very helpful, Councillor Oxborough.
Yeah, on the same subject, I mean, I endorse exactly everything that Councillor Sellers has said, but I'm wondering if we perhaps need to have an examination of the trends in car parking, doing comparisons between previous years and this year, and how charging structures might have changed patterns of usage and patterns of behaviour. It's always more complicated than the bald numbers would have us perhaps believe. It'd be interesting to dig into that as part of the review to understand exactly what's going on underneath the surface rather than just simply taking it as an up or a down.
Thank you. For example, there are users who don't realise that they can buy season tickets, example, and I think that when I realised that there are members of the BID and the Chamber of Commerce and that had not been communicated, we really do need to look into this and make it easier for residents and businesses and for the town, for the off-street car parking owners as well, the Town Council and the Borough Council. So it does need a really good review.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds and Councillor Cheadle.
I'm confident that review will include both the points raised by Councillor Oxborough and Councillor Sellers, and I think also in that comparison we should compare with other district councils around Devon, so that we can compare our fees against them to see whether we're in line or how it's working for them, and so on, learn from their experiences. So I think this will be a really comprehensive review. It's a really good opportunity. It's such an important point, not just from our point of view, but in terms of our town centres, our traders, our visitors. So it is, a really big piece of work that needs to be done thoroughly to make sure we come up with the right proposals.
Thank you, Councillor Cheadle.
Just on a matter of timing, I don't know where the proposal for introducing charging for parking in the High Street in Tavistock is going. I know it's been mooted, but that will play into the any analysis that is done, of course.
That's an excellent point. I'm not absolutely sure where we are with that. Some of the Tavistock members may be able to confirm that. That is ongoing, but that would certainly need to be considered at the time of this review.
As a point of information, I mean, clearly we don't want to take over our audit meeting over this. I did call a meeting with the Devon County Council officers, with the local businesses, the representatives of the portfolio holder for parking, etc., which was just to share the ideas about on-street car parking. However, it was delayed now, and West Devon's taking over because West Devon didn't feel that it was inclusive enough. So unfortunately, that's now been delayed until September. That will be and West Devon Borough Council is going to organise it, because quite frankly enough time of Devon officers' time has been used, and the invitation to just discuss it was unfortunately aborted. So the on-street car parking, there was no decision made, and the invitation to just listen to ideas was declined. So unfortunately, there's a delay now. That's the latest. And I think over to you, Chairman. I'm sure you want to discuss far more than this.
No, thank you. I think it's quite an important issue. I take it there's a mechanism where the concerns expressed in the audit committees could be obviously taken into account, and presumably through the minutes, I guess. Are there...
Yes, exactly that, Chair. We can make sure those points are reflected in the minutes, and we can. That's something that the committee can ask the hub committee to take into account when it considers car parking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Oxford.
Right, another fairly sort of substantial question, I suppose, regarding the implications of inflation and interest rates. To an extent, when we look at the numbers, there's some offsetting figures here. Higher inflation has resulted in some costs rising. Higher interest rates have resulted in some income rising. But the question, I suppose, is, do we have a sensitivity analysis, or could we have a sensitivity analysis looking at the impact of potential future changes and the what-ifs? I love what-ifs because they're great for risk management. What if, for example, with the reversal in inflation that we've seen doesn't continue, and we see it going back up again as a result of the failed grain situation in Ukraine and Putin pulling out of that grain deal, increasing the cost of commodities on the open market, and that will feed through into domestic inflation. We only need to see one more major negative happen with the war in Ukraine, and we could see a lot of other inflationary pressures coming from that as well. We need to be thinking about the what-ifs around that, because it could really bite us badly. In terms of the costs, for example, on the waste contract, number of household collections from natural property growth, had we not factored that in? Because we know when things are coming on stream, are we not budgeting ahead for those? And if not, why not? And can we do it in the future? Because we shouldn't be caught out by that. We know what house building has been agreed. We know what the plan for completions would be and the sales of those. We would naturally expect there to be extra collections and therefore extra costs. So it should be a factored figure rather than one that suddenly jumps out at us. Whatever happens, of course, an increase in cost means we've got to find an increase in revenue to compensate. We can't always guarantee or rely upon that 575,000 extra we had from our investment portfolio.
Thank you, Chairman. So yeah, that's exactly right. We do sensitivity analysis as part of our budget setting process. So when members set the budget at council in February, one of the schedules to the budget report was quite in-depth sensitivity analysis. So that looked at things like, for example, what happens if we have a 7.5% reduction in our income? That would be a loss to the council of about £260,000. If we had, for example, a 5% reduction in overall savings, that would be another 90,000. If we had a 5% increase in budget pressures of the council, that would be another 159,000. We look at things like if our collection of council tax falls by 1%, that would have an impact on the council of around about 54,000. In terms of treasury management income, a 1% increase would generate somewhere between 100 and 120,000 for us. And again, we have the impact of the pay award, whereby, again, a 1% increase in the pay award, that can be an impact of about 50,000. So what we do as part of the budget report is we put all of those pressures together, and that then informs the recommendation to members of what we keep as a minimum level of unearmarked reserves. So that informed the decision to set that minimum level of unearmarked reserves at £900,000. And that's the minimum that we would recommend that our unearmarked reserves should ever go down to. And I think if we were ever at that level, sort of red flashing warning lights would be going off saying, you know, we are getting too low on our unearmarked reserves. At the moment, we're over 1.5 million. As part of the budget setting process, we set an operating level of 1.25 million. So we're operating just nicely above the minimum level. Obviously, the reason for keeping those levels of reserves is for things like unforeseen circumstances. If we had a big planning appeal against the council, you know, that could easily be £500,000. So these are the reasons we need to keep reserves. But yes, we will be doing a new medium-term financial strategy to the Hub Committee in September, and we will update that sensitivity analysis as part of that. Because although inflation is starting to come down, we are looking at treasury management income. Mrs. Henstock has just said that our treasury management income for the first quarter is looking very good, isn't it? And we are up against our budget already. And probably by the time we get to the end of the financial year, we'll probably be in excess of that £500,000 budget, somewhere between 200,000. So it's likely we are going to be up against our treasury management income targets. Although similarly, there is an outstanding pay award that's not yet been agreed with the unions. That national agreement has been deferred, so there hasn't been a decision on that yet. Unions have been balloted on that. So again, when the next budget monitoring report comes to members of the Hub Committee in September, we will put all those things together and look at, you know, what could be the bottom line impact. But actually, with car parking income starting to recover, treasury management income going up, you know, I think in terms of the external factors impacting on the council's finances, that budget monitoring report will still look quite healthy. In terms of the issue about the waste contract, increase in the number of households, I think that is something which has impacted on us. I think the increases in the number of properties has been more than previously expected, which is why we can now see that we probably need to start factoring that into our base budget, because it's reached that level whereby it's more than just a small bit of growth. It's quite significant growth, which is a good thing in terms of additional council tax income. But yes, we do need to start setting that aside in the budget reports, which is what we've done. It hasn't been at such a significant level at the past that we felt we needed to build it in, but it's starting to get bigger now. So that's why we're recommending to start building that increase in property growth into the base budget for waste. Because if you have a small bit of growth, you can absorb it within the current rounds. It's when that growth hits a trigger level that you need an extra round, and that's the point that we've hit now. So we need to, and it's the extra round that actually then starts to cost the money. So that's why we're recommending putting money aside in the budget for that now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor?
Just one final question, and that is about the income from the leisure services contract. Has that maintained a level of income at the predicted expected level according to the original contracts? And is that secure going into the future, bearing in mind, again, the uncertainties around some of the traded commodities that the service depends upon for its operation?
Yep, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the leisure contract, yes, the payments that have been received from the contractor are in line with a report that went to members back in March 2022, which set the management fee income for the 22-23 period. In terms of memberships of the leisure centres, there's a part in the risk report which talks about overall membership. So Tavistock, Meadowlands is doing really well, and the membership is actually 3.7% higher than it was back in March 2020. So Tavistock, I think it has a very loyal customer base. It's recovered to pre-COVID levels, which is really good. Parklands at Oakhampton, however, is still lower than the pre-COVID levels. So membership levels are down in Oakhampton, and they're about 18% lower than just before we went into the pandemic in March. So yes, the Fusion, who are our leisure contractor, are doing a lot of things around how can we grow that income stream, how can we grow our membership levels, very much how can we work with schools and get fee income from schools using the swimming. So yes, very much looking at the marketing and advertising. Obviously, we're going into the key summer season now, and attracting sort of, that visitor economy into our leisure centres. So yeah, that is something we're working in partnership with Fusion on around that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any further questions? I've got one question, and you partly answered it about the level of reserves at 1.25 million, and obviously I'm very pleased that it's at a healthy level above. I take it that each year, as you implied, that level is reassessed. So if that level of if the reassessed level due to high risk is higher than the level of reserves, how do we budget for that to be put back up again?
Yes.
I think, but you didn't hear, shall I say?
I don't know. I know you're right by it, but could you hear? Oh, it's just me. I have had my ears tested. No, I have had my hearing tested.
No, I think it's important. I just asked that I was very pleased that our level of reserves is in excess of the safety levels as defined. So my sort of academic type question was that when we reassess that, I guess each year, the safety level is greater than the existing level of reserves we actually have, is how do we reflect that in our budgets?
So the level of reserves is something that we would look at certainly on a 6-monthly basis. So in September, the Hub Committee will consider the latest iteration of the medium-term financial strategy. So that financial strategy will look at the Council's finances over the next 3 years and make an assessment to members or recommendation to members of what the new operating level and minimum level should be. That will be informed by the sensitivity analysis that we will do. So we will look at things like drops in income levels, increases in budget pressures. I haven't yet done that exercise. That's my job for sort of July and August, so that before the report comes to members in September. It's probably unlikely to change significantly. It may go up a little bit, but I think probably, we're in a good position. We're 1.5 million at the moment in our unearmarked reserves. We're doing some reserves benchmarking with an organisation called LG Inform. They look at levels of reserves nationally. So we will look at that evidence in making our recommendation to members as well. So comparing ourselves to like-sized councils, what levels of reserves have they got? I think probably our external auditors, Grant Thornton, would probably say that our reserves are probably slightly on the low side when compared to other councils of a similar size. That's to be expected because that is mainly due to our size. We are one of the smallest district councils nationally, so therefore it wouldn't be expected that we would have the same level of reserves of councils that are larger than ourselves or have a larger population. So I think if you looked at the size of the council, I think we're probably about where we need to be, about average. I'm in a group with other Section 151 officers of similarly small district councils, and some of their levels of reserves are quite a bit lower than ours. So I think we're probably where we need to be, but we don't want to be complacent. It's something we will assess in September, and we'll look at external benchmarking of reserves. The government have set up a new body called Offlog. It's not the old Audit Commission, but it's a new government body that's been set up. And one of the things they are going to look at is reserves as well. And they will take the level of reserves from government returns that we complete. So again, that's something which will have a bit of a national focus. Thank you.
That's very helpful. That's very helpful. Thank you very much. I was going to say, any further questions? Yes, Councillor Sellers.
Yes, just for interest really for new members, what are the daily running costs of our council? Because it's quite a good...
It is, yes.
you know, when you've got reserves, just how many days it would keep us going?
Sorry, I thought the question was a slightly different question, which is something that I'm also researching with similar sized small councils, which is about every council will have what we would call the cost of opening the doors. You know, no matter what size council you are, there will be things that you need to do. For example, every council has to have a chief executive, it has to have a monitoring officer, it has to have a section 151 officer, no matter how big or small the council. It has to have certain things in order to run the council. For example, members, quite often has to have somewhere to base the council. And in the past, we've been quite successful at lobbying the government about what the cost of opening the doors is. And members that may have been here sort of 10 years ago will remember we were successful in lobbying the government to put a fixed cost of opening the doors within the finance settlement, and actually West Devon did quite well out of that. And the work that we're looking to do now is to try to update that and to say, well, what would be a fixed cost for the council opening its doors now, so that we could similarly lobby government for that. In terms of how long would our reserves keep us going for, if you like, that was an interesting piece of work that we did, certainly when COVID hit, because one of the things we were very concerned about was council tax income and business rate income, because we are responsible for collecting that. You know, those two income streams alone are £50 million, and we have to pay the council tax over to Devon County, even if we couldn't collect it. And therefore, when the pandemic hit, one of the first things we did do was look at reserves and say, okay, well, how long would that keep us going for? And I think it was around about a year, wasn't it, that we thought, and we reported that position to members and said, well, look, if the worst come to the worst, our reserves would keep us going that long. I mean, if you look at our net budget now, it's around about £10 million, and that is about what we've got in reserves. We've got 10.47 million. So, yeah, we haven't done a sort of scientific analysis of that, but, you know, that's a sort of ballpark figure, really. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. No, it's really good input.
Would a very simple measure be to take that net budget and divide it by 365 to arrive at a daily cost of running the council? Not that we operate on 365 days, but it's a good ballpark figure, I would suggest, and probably a very scary figure.
Yes.
Well, thank you for scaring us like that. That's do we have any more questions? No, that's great. Well, thank you. I think that's been quite a good debate with lots of really good questioning. Could I put forward the recommendation to note these? Does anybody wish, therefore, to make any comment or debate about the recommendation? Doesn't look like it, does it? So what do we do? Does somebody propose? Just no, that's... could we move on to the next item then? The review of the internal audit plan.
Thank you, Chair. This is the internal audit plan for 2023-24. The plan was considered and endorsed by the Audit Committee in March 23, but this is an opportunity for you as a new committee to comment and highlight specific audit work that you may wish to include. The plan is a live document, so audits can be added if required throughout the year. The number of days provided are indicative. Internal audit will use their discretion to undertake more or less days on specific areas based on their findings. The overall number of days being undertaken is about the same as for the last financial year. Underpinning the plan for next year is a 4-year plan to support periodic review of all core areas. Details of the 4-year plan can be found in Appendix B, which is on page 181 of your agenda papers. And finally, Chair, the report recommendation is that the committee reconfirm the proposed internal audit plan for 23-24 as set out in Appendix A. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would the internal auditors like to comment, introduce?
Yes, good morning. So Paul Middlemass from Devon Audit Partnership. I'm in essence your audit manager. So as Councillor Edmonds has said, this is our plan that was considered in March. Just to summarise, in essence, we aim to do the sort of core audits such as council tax. We do high risk areas. We do follow-ups, and then also we do other audits as per the sort of 4-year plan that we have. Interesting enough, listening to what was discussed earlier, so we're doing audits on treasury management, we're doing audits on waste collection, we're doing audits on car parking and planning. So we're covering a lot of sort of areas that you're interested in. From my perspective, I suppose, as well as confirming that controls are effective, I suppose I'm looking to tease out various things such as the actual costs and income that the council is receiving. It's particularly interesting if there are, for instance, non-statutory activities that council is doing. That, so that's a question. Also trends over 3, 4, 5, 6 year period, because often in accounts you just see this was what it was last year, this was what it is this year. But again, it's interesting to look at a wider time scale, particularly with sort of COVID, pre-COVID factors involved. Obviously, we're looking at the risk management and the opportunity management of different areas. And the actual car sort of systems that are used, and obviously car parking is an example where you're using perhaps Ringo or other parking systems which are moved to non-cash systems and so on. So those are some of the sort of areas we look at. So in essence, this is the plan for you. We've started to plan. You'll see the next agenda item is where we actually talk about the results of the 22-23 audit plan. So that's the sort of summary of the plan that we proposed and agreed last year, and the result of the plan. So it is a live document that we can add to, and through the year we'll provide updates to members on progress to the plan and on timing of audit. So that's a brief summary. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee?
I'm curious. When you go through the various elements of the audit, to what extent do you focus on the what, and to what extent do you focus on the why behind the what, and how deeply do you go in looking at the why behind the what? You get my drift.
So the why, I mean, so we would look at, for instance, whether it is in accordance with the council strategy and objectives. So we might ask in car parking, going back to that, is there a car parking strategy, but how does that align to your climate change strategy, net zero and so on, and introduction of charging points in car parks and solar panels and so on. So yeah, we would sort of highlight or sort of think about the what the council is aiming to achieve and why, not just income collection, but also things like reputational risk involved in doing things that might be unpopular and so on. So that's, I suppose, an attempt to answer your question. But
the cross-linkages between various policies, I think, is a particularly interesting area, because we could often have a policy in one area that does one thing and then a policy in another area that does the exact opposite. And understanding those conflicts is really quite useful.
Thank you. Looking through the 200 or so pages of stuff in front of us, it's quite difficult to find the bit you're looking for online. But my question is around the risk profile of the council, and I'm not sure whether this question, I know we're going to look at a different paper on risk, but I'll ask the question now. If you want to park it, park it. Some of the risk mitigation statements say things like continue to monitor the discussions between A and B. And I just wonder, from an auditor's point of view, how involved you get in those conversations. For example, I mean, one of the risks which attracted my attention, because it just happens to be one of the red ones, is Fusion and the leisure contract. And one of the mitigation strategies in that risk profile is to continue to talk to the management of Fusion to find out, you know, what they're doing and how things are going and whatever. How involved do the auditors get in those conversations?
So we wouldn't typically get involved in operational sort of day-to-day decision making. We would probably only come to it if we were doing a particular audit in a particular area. We did, as part of last year's plan, do an audit on risk management itself. So and we sort of, you know, went through the risk management strategy and documents and so on, and looked at examples of how the council is managing risk. I think there is an element of the council understanding what its risk assessment is judged to be at the time, and then deciding if that's that's too high for it, and coming to an understanding of, okay, we want to get to a rating of a lower rating. What do we need to do to get there, and how effective are those actions are? So I think, yeah, we would, I suppose, be concerned if just talking or having meetings about it. I suppose we'd expect more sort of specific actions to address the risk area.
I'm not sure if I've got to the bottom of the question there, but do you actually dig into the actions that the council has taken to mitigate those risks and, in a sense, qualify them?
So when we do audits, we make recommendations and we agree whether those are high, medium or low priority recommendations based upon us and the business area agreement of what the risk is. And I think I'm due to talk about the council's approach to recommendation management in the next agenda item. But we don't have an active role to oversee the risk management process in the council. It's not our role to do that.
I think it's a really key issue, and probably better dealt with in the next items. So thank you for raising it. That's exactly the area. It's exactly the area that's covered. Yeah. Could you just confirm this plan came before the previous audit committee here, and is unchanged since that committee. It's also been before South Hams, and unchanged from that.
Yes, so it was the same in essence. Although you'll see on page 168 of the pack that we've sort of taken the 20 days of contingency that we had in the plan and allocated it to the three audits, which are a full review of the Sorkin Harbour arrangements. An audit and comments and complaints, and a review of project management. So that's the only additions to the plan that were discussed at the last councils. From my recollection, I don't think the meetings, they didn't highlight anything additional to those.
Thank you. It's very, very helpful. Has anybody got any other questions? Well, could I just recommend, before the recommendation, we reconfirm? Thank you very much. Can we move on to the next one, the review of the internal audit plan, I believe?
Yes.
I think it's a Councillor Edmonds show today.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. This is the annual internal audit report, which summarises the work carried out by internal audit during the financial year ending 31st of March 2023. It's provided to inform the Council's governance statement along with the report from external audit. The overall assurance provided is a reasonable assurance which is consistent with that received by most other councils. Internal Audit considers this assurance level as a fair assessment given its findings. While good arrangements were identified in many areas, weaknesses were also identified, which are listed in the report. A summary of assurance opinions by service area can be found on page 191 of your agenda papers. The majority of areas are rated substantial or reasonable assurance, with just 2 areas relating to West Devon rated as limited assurance, and they are buildings maintenance and procurement. Details of the review findings for these 2 areas are again on page 192. Subsequent to the issue of the agenda papers, we have obtained written progress updates from the heads of service for building maintenance works and procurement, and I can share these with the committee if required. Page 192 includes a comment on the implementation of internal audit recommendations. As part of their work, internal audit assesses if management actions from previous reviews have been implemented. Management is continuing to progress any outstanding audit recommendations, and an audit tracker is in place to ensure that recommendations are completed. With a growing national threat of fraud and financial crime, it is pleasing to note that internal audit's opinion is that risk of fraud at the council is considered low. At management request, internal audit undertook extensive work to confirm that controls over COVID grants were effective. Audit has provided a substantial assurance opinion that payments were accurately made and scheme administration conformed with the guidance. The report recommends that members note the internal audit report for 2022-23 and consider it when reviewing the annual governance statement. And as we know, Chair, Mr. Middlemas is with us today, and I'm sure Paul will be happy to provide any further comments on his report. Thank you.
You should say something now or wait for the internal audit to say something.
Yeah, so, I just want to introduce Tony Rose, who wants to say something about the work ahead and so on and report, so.
Move closer so people can hear. Thank you very much. Just a brief one from myself. So my name's Tony Rose. I'm the head of Devon Audit Partnership. I don't often get the opportunity to come to audit committees, in truth, with other things going on, and this is one I do like to come to because it does summarise the work of the team, Paul and others, and the interactions with officers as well. From my perspective, the first thing here is really to say thank you to Paul, thank you to the team, to Julie, to Matt and others for getting to this point, and thank you to Lisa and others within both South Hams and West Devon to be able to produce the report and the work within it. It can be a challenging time, and internal audit is a great thing, but not always easy to work through on some occasions, if you like. But Lisa has always been positive in her support in that respect. And for me, it really is just that public thank you to everyone involved, and to get that on record, if I may, for the delivery of the work. Not just Paul and the team, but officers within West Devon as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did you want to add anything to the report?
Well, so this is obviously our annual report for 22-23. I think it's relatively clear. Page 190 gives a very sort of synopsis of our assurance opinion, which is reasonable, which, and I'm not sure if there's any studies been done, but I suspect reasonable assurance is probably given to sort of 90% of councils around the country. There'll be progressively fewer substantial and probably a lot fewer limited and no assurances. And then the next page after that provides a sort of summary of the audits we've done by the business area and the assurance level provided. So really happy to take any questions on the paper.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sellis first, and then Councillor Cheadle.
Yeah, thanks very much. A nice report to read. Just really, Just checking, is all the IT that you work with, is it all as user-friendly and up-to-date as possible, so that you're able to utilise your time smoothly when you're going through all the processes and analysing? Is the IT system which West Devon provides robust enough so that you can do your job? Because I think as an audit committee, if there are any weaknesses, we need to know about that. And also on page 192, the implementation of internal audit recommendations, just at the end you say about the number of, there were high, medium management actions, and then at the end you just put, for instance, relate to systems no longer in use. 55 are in progress but overdue. 12 are overdue and not started. And this is the one, management is continuing to progress the remaining management actions. I'd just like to know what that means. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So first question about systems we use. So obviously I work for Devon Audit Partnership and Tony, and we have a team of people. We are hosted on Devon County Council and have Devon County Council laptops. That said, the two auditors who provide the audits actually work for West Devon and South Hams actually, so they have West Devon IT and can access all the equipment and so on. I thought it was interesting the conversation earlier about IT and costs and so on. I suppose my thought on that was obviously spending on IT and the ability to work from home cost does increase business resilience, and we've seen councils sort of putting a lot more resources into that, increasing their bandwidth, which means that they can operate successfully at home. I've seen no problems, and Julie and Matt, the two auditors, have not reported any issues with the IT that they get and their ability to use council systems and so on. The second question about internal audit recommendations. So for every audit that we do, we when we work through a process, we identify what we consider to be weaknesses, and we discuss and agree those with management. And these result in the report in a collection of high, medium, and low priority recommendations. So the higher, the sort of ones that you need to do these because it's really a bit risky that you don't, or very risky. And medium and low are progressively less important. So when we make these recommendations, obviously we agree the officer responsible and the target date for them to be done by, and again it's very much a agreement with the business area to do them by a target date. Now I think it's fair to say that the council has not had a system to track those audit recommendations, partly I understand because of a lot of focus was on COVID and so on, but up to now has not had a system to track those recommendations. So several months ago I provided the list of these are all the recommendations we've made since April 2020 to officers to say can you confirm which of these have been implemented. And they are still working through that risk. It is obviously a concern. In essence, the council is tolerating known weaknesses and risk in not progressing those recommendations. So it is a bit of a work in progress, and we provided a sort of possibly a month or so out of date now, but we provided the update that we got from officers in terms of where they were with working through those recommendations, and obviously since that period there will be further recommendations that they need to start to track because we've done further audits.
So, yes, I was just going to come in if you wouldn't mind, just to follow up.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether officers have any concerns. You know, is this low risk what's happening here, or is do officers need more people, more resources, or is it something that I don't need to worry about too much?
Chairman, I think Mr. Hawke
Liz
would
like
like
to
to
step in.
answer that question, if that's possible.
Thank you, Councillor Sellis. I think, to really build on what Mr. Middlemass has said, we now have that audit tracker in place. I think it probably goes back a little bit to your previous conversation. The IT systems didn't necessarily talk as well as they could, which means we've had to get an export from the audit system. But we are continuing to work through those audit trackers, and we do monitor them on a regular basis, and we will be managing progress through the Officer Performance Board, which consists of myself, Mr. Powell, and Mr. Molyneux. And we've got sort of broad oversight of a large chunk of the organisation just to monitor progress against those audit recommendations. So we will be doing that through our existing structures.
Then maybe at the next audit meeting, could we have an update to see, how it's ironed out and, how you're progressing? Is that okay?
Could I just jump in a second? That was exactly the point I was going to make, or going to ask. Well, did it. No, I think my particular question was, how does the audit committee keep up to date with the effectiveness of management completing these audits? Because this, for me, completes the cycle. So it's really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. I think, and again, just to further build on previous responses, so we're focusing on the high priority actions at the moment, but we can certainly bring an update report back to this committee. I mean, audit do have a cycle as set out in their work programme of revisiting audits, so that is a piece of work that's undertaken. And I think, Paul, I'm right in saying that you do focus on those areas with limited assurance. So in terms of those priorities, those will be reported through audit progress reports anyway to this committee.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cheadle wanted to say something. Do you want to?
No, that was exactly my question, is how these audit recommendations were being monitored and brought back to this committee.
Sorry, Councillor Edmonds, you want to?
Just to say again, as I mentioned in my introduction, we now have updates for the two areas of limited assurance. So those are now available for members if they wish to read them and consider them.
Thank you very much. Anybody got any further questions?
I would like to read them.
I think we'd all like to read them.
I'd read them now, Councillor Cheadle, or after the meeting. I can read them. One's quite lengthy, but I think we'll be happy to publish those to members of the audit committee after the meeting.
I think that was the point we were making.
So that covers the building maintenance and the procurement.
Sorry, the internal audit.
Yes, so just a couple of points. So as Councillor Edmonds has said, when we provide a limited assurance opinion for an audit, we do a follow-up on that, and we confirm have those recommendations been done. So the risk is a bit mitigated in that respect. And then secondly, it is good practice for audit committees to receive reports on those recommendations that are overdue. So I think when this council perhaps gets to a position where it's gone through all its lists and assessed where it is, probably it would be good if you receive reports on these are the overdue recommendations for you to look at and say, well, this is acceptable, or no, this isn't, because this is risk that you're not prepared to tolerate. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, thank you. That was a really positive debate. I take it this will just happen by virtue of being noted in the minutes, or do we need a resolution on it?
Chairman, we could probably pick it up when we look at the work plan, which is the final item, and add that into a future committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Does anybody have any further?
Well, Chair, I think it is worth reiterating at this point that, during that period, the COVID period, we must not lose sight of the fact that members of staff from across the council were pulled into the processing of COVID business grants and in many other areas connected with COVID. And then, we move into a cost of living. So there can, there are ongoing pressures across the council. We have a finite workforce, and it's not easy to increase that workforce, to cope with peaks and troughs in demand. So we are where we are. So I think we must bear that in mind, if you like, the context of these perhaps delay in keeping on top of some of the recommendations. But for me, if they're dealt with in order of priority, the top priority, the high-risk ones are dealt with in a timely manner, and I think that would be prudent, and then work through that list until, you're satisfied as a committee that those actions have been correctly followed up.
Thank you. It's a very helpful comment. Councillor Sellers.
Yeah, if I might just add, that was actually how I pitched the question. Just asking whether, because we have a duty of care.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? No. Could we put the recommendation to noted? Yes. Noted. Thank you. Can we move on to strategic risk update?
I think that's me again, Chair. Okay, I'm on a roll now. So, strategic risk. The Audit and Governance Committee received 6 monthly updates on the Council's strategic risks. The updates, this update sets out in Appendix A the current strategic risk as considered by the Officer Performance Board in June 2023. The identified risks are as follows: adherence to the medium-term financial strategy, inadequate staffing resource, leisure provision and business continuity. Action plans and progress updates are provided for each of the identified risks. The current risk strategy has been in place since 2018 and has worked well for the Council, but it is now the intention to update the risk and opportunity management strategy by the autumn of this year to reflect changes to the internal governance and structures of Council services. The update will coincide with the development of our next corporate strategy. I think it's worth highlighting that this is a risk and opportunity management strategy, with the planned update giving due emphasis to identifying opportunities for the Council, for example, grants for climate change project, or, as we've successfully bid for recently, UK shared prosperity funding. Since the last update to this committee in March 23, the risks related to cost of living impacts on Council services and the Homes for Ukraine scheme have been de-escalated from the Strategic Risk Register and are now being managed at an operational level. Effective risk management is an essential aspect of our performance management framework. Consideration of organisational risks is a day-to-day activity for heads of services and managers, and ongoing training is being planned to ensure they continue to effectively identify and manage risks that impact the Council and the services it provides. The report has 2 recommendations. Firstly, that the committee considers the Strategic Risk Register, and secondly, notes the intention to update the strategic risk profile of the Council and the risk and opportunity management framework alongside the development of its corporate strategy.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have any questions? Councillor Cheadle first.
Well, it's sort of repeated the one I asked some time ago, but now we're on the risk register. I thought I'd just bring it back again. Some of the mitigation strategies are difficult to interpret, shall I say. If I look at the risk associated with health and well-being, which is principally about fusion, continue to engage with fusion to understand the issues. Well, that's fine. I would expect people to do that. How's it going? We don't know. All we know is we're talking to them. So I'm not sure the risk register actually sort of informs us very well about what the actual risk is in this particular case. Now, I'm sure, like a swan swimming across the pond, it's all serene on the surface and paddling like fury underneath. And lots of work is probably going on, talking to Fusion and really understanding the position that they're in. It's difficult to get that from reading the risk register.
Do you have a comment, officer comment?
I can probably respond in terms of the general approach. So I think that in the mitigating actions, that sort of what are we doing to reduce the risk box? Yes, you're right, Councillor Cheadle, they are probably quite broad and high level. I think the key is the current update at the bottom of each page's update, which sets out specifically what we're doing, because those conversations will change at each point in time. I mean, I'll take on board that comment, and we could certainly look at providing some more detail under that section in future reports, but the current update, I think, probably sets out what we're doing with Fusion as a result of those ongoing discussions. In terms of those ongoing discussions, I'm not sure where we currently are beyond the update in front of you today, Lisa. I don't know if there's anything you want to add. But I take on board that point, Councillor Cheadle, and we can certainly update the mitigating actions for future reports.
Just come back. I mean, what I am sure about, that if there is a hiccup, in a sense, in those negotiations, officers will bring this back as an urgent issue for the council to understand, and that's, there must be triggers. I'm not sure what they are, but I mean, it'll become obvious, I think, when one of those triggers is approaching. And that would be the time where an officer report would be brought back to the council for some sort of executive decision to be made.
Absolutely, Councillor Cheadle, and I think it's fair to say that day in, day out, officers are managing these risks, and the position is constantly changing, so the update we'd give today is probably different to the update in front of you for some of the risks, but yes, that is part of our day-to-day work programme of delivering services for the council.
Thank you. Any more questions? Sorry.
Yes, just a couple of observations from me as your internal audit manager. So firstly, I suppose it is good practice if perhaps a committee wants to do and take deep dives of any of these areas, whether you do one risk at each meeting or approach some sort of strategy such as that. So where you ask officers to go into a bit more detail on that. So that's just a suggestion. And then secondly, I suppose second suggestion, obviously, it is good practice that you have a relatively small number of corporate risks. And I suppose I don't agree. So I think that they all look reasonable. I suppose the only one I suggest might be on there because of its massive impact is, of course, cyber security. Although whether that's included in business continuity is a question mark. We have looked at cybersecurity in last financial year, and we'll do so again, and think arrangements are good for the council. At the same time, the impact, if risk materialises, is so significant, and the cost that probably might be beneficial to have it just as a constant risk on your risk register to ensure there's focus on that area. But as I said, those are just two suggestions from me.
Thank you. Do we have any officer comment?
Just that, Chairman, I know IT arrangements are looked at both by internal audit but also external audit. So Grant Thornton do a very extensive audit of our IT arrangements as part of their external audit, the accounts as well, and they bring in specialist auditors to do that.
Thank you, Chair. No, just to add to that, I mean, the cybersecurity is at the moment under business continuity. If you look at the actual current update for June 2023, it sets out our plans around cybersecurity. I mean, if the committee felt it would be better to separate that out as a specific risk, then that's clearly something we can do. But it is under the umbrella of business continuity at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Cheadle.
No, I rather like the idea of keeping the number of strategic risks fairly low. But I do take up the suggestion that we might do a deep dive at each audit committee meeting, and I would suggest that we sort of concentrate on the top, if I can put it that way. Managing staffing resources is the biggest single risk as identified by the risk matrix, and having a specific presentation on how we're managing that at the next audit committee, I think would be useful.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that comment. I mean, in previous audit committees that I've been on, deep dives are very much good practice and help the committee to understand the nature of the controls, the nature of the problem, and help them in their justification. So I personally would be all for it. And perhaps we could discuss that later outside the meeting when we do the programme.
Yes, certainly, Chairman. We can build that into the work plan of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sellis.
Thanks. Thank you very much. I think the general feeling is that we just don't want any shocks, and that we have we do have a very good working relationship with the finance team, who are always very approachable. Equally, the auditors are as well. So that we are representing the public to the best of our ability, and looking after our finances as well as possible. And we just don't want any shocks. And that's it. And how we manage to, I think the presentations are very readable, which is always very useful, especially when you have such tomes. I mean, it's exceptional, the length today, because we've got the draft statement of accounts. But generally, I hope that it's not quite as lengthy as that normally, but I'm happy to consider the risk registers.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments?
Just a comment, if I may, please, Chair. And I think in recent past, our experience has been, and I think it links back to Councillor Tudor's point, around bringing these risks to members. We've had recent experience of that through during COVID and regarding leisure centres, when the council has had to get involved, shall we say. And I think that was dealt with effectively and timely. And I'm sure I'm sure there's been other occasions which I can't recall just at the moment. But I think we have a good record of officers flagging up risks when they reach a particular point, and bring them forward to members so members can consider them. My experience has been that members have come up with some very sensible decisions, and we've managed the risks, I think, appropriately, and I'm sure that will continue to be the case going forward.
Oh, that's really great to hear. Thanks very much for those comments. Do we have any further questions? Could I put the recommendation? We have considered it and we've noted it. Noted. Thank you very much. It's not Councillor Edmonds on this one, so sorry about that. Don't get.
I think it is actually.
It is you. It is you. Oh dear
Chair,
me.
I'm starting to feel slightly left out there.
Oh, well,
so this is the independent member report. The Redmond review highlighted the need for every audit committee to have at least one independent person. Legislation is needed to implement its recommendations. SIPFA subsequently introduced a recommendation that council audit committees co-opt 2 independent members. Devon Audit Partnership has agreed to manage recruitment activity to identify independent members to sit on Devon local authorities, including West Devon. Having independent members on the committee provides an opportunity to offer their skills and experience to the council, but independent members would not have voting rights. In terms of remuneration for the newly appointed independent members, a recent recruitment exercise for the Devon Fire and Rescue Service has set a remuneration amount for an independent member at half of the member's annual allowance. A remuneration amount would need to be agreed amongst Devon local authorities. So it's recommended that Mrs. Buckle works with the Devon Audit Partnership in progressing the appointment of up to 2 independent members to the Audit and Governance Committee during 2023-24. The 5 report recommendations are set out on page 225 of your agenda papers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry for making you feel left out there. So does anybody have any questions or even comments? Yeah, I think it's straightforward. I'd commend it. I think it's really good practice. So could we accept this? Well, thank you very much. I think we're now at the last item, aren't we? Is there actually, on the proposed work plan, what are we supposed to do with this? Note it or propose it?
Normally, Chairman, the work plan will be noted by members. I think we're looking to add in, if it's acceptable to yourself, Chair, into the 5th of December meeting, if we call it the audit tracker of internal audit recommendations. So that would be a separate report on that audit committee agenda. And then look to schedule in at what point we would bring a report on the risk around staffing resources. I don't know if Mr. Powell or Mr. Hawke have a view on that as to which meeting that could be brought back to. Thank you.
Chair, I think December would be better if that's okay, unless members feel it's urgent in advance of that.
Yes, December, yeah, I think we're recommending December as well, and so it could sit alongside the audit tracker report. Because we have got the strategic risk register coming back to the 5th of December meeting. Thank you.
That sounds good. Any other comments? Well, that's great. Obviously noted or accepted or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yep, that's great. Thank you, Chairman.
It is what it is. That's what it. Well, as a personal aside, at the end, closing the meeting, I'd really like to give my thanks to the star of the show and all the officers of sport for all the tremendous work that's been put in, to all the papers. I think it's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.